Hi there, this is episode 17 of my little podcast here, where I chat about everything I've been knitting over the last usually 3 weeks. And I surprised myself this time. I have 2 finished objects, that is good. I feel like ever since this year started, I've just been trying to somehow get my web situation under control. I'm not sure why it's not working. I feel like whenever I start a project, something majorly goes wrong, and I don't know why. I'm just trying to catch up and fix it somehow. I feel like for the last 2 podcast episodes, I've been making like okay progress. I'm trying to be more realistic with the goals that I set and not completely get ahead of myself and have 1,000 ideas and start on all of them and then somehow nothing is working out. So I have 2 smaller finished objects, and then for my bigger whips, I've been trying to just focus on one at a time. I think that's what works best for me, because then I don't get so overwhelmed and I feel like I'm not making progress on anything anymore. So that's been working okay. I did make a big chunk of progress on my main whip right now, and let's get into it. I always forget to mention what I'm wearing. So this is my Ivy top, the white stockinette fabric under here. I actually washed all of my summer knits this week because I have an event this weekend where I might wear one of them, and you know, they've all been in my wardrobe for a few months now, so I thought before I start wearing them for the season it might be nice to get them all clean and fresh. So I found this again. This was my main nemesis of last summer. I worked on this top for so long. My plan with it was to just have a very simple, easy project where I could just follow a pattern and not think about it, and it turned out way more complicated, and I'm still not happy with the result because of the way that the armhole worked out over here. It just kind of, the fabric folds over, so that's why this has been my favorite way of wearing it, with like something over top so you can just see the nice neckline here, and that's what I've been doing. I'm gonna see if I'll fix it this season, but maybe not. So for my finished objects, last time I showed the penny gloves that I made, which was like a little palette cleanser project that I did with some leftover stash yarn from Expression Fiber Arts. It's called Alpaca Silk Lace, and I had some leftover from my Lumi scarf that I made in December, so I thought I might just make a very simple project. And these were finished last time, and then I had the idea to add a little bit more to them, because I also had some Cardiff cashmere still laying around from my other Lumi scarf that I made in November, like my sample of it. And originally my plan for this little bit of leftover Cardiff cashmere was to make a headband, but you know how it goes. You have a plan and then the seasons keep changing up on you, so I just thought it might not make the most sense to start on a headband right now, since I'm not really wearing like hats and stuff anymore when I go outside now. So I thought, since my penny gloves turned out pretty short because that was just all of the yarn I had, it might be nice to use the Cardiff cashmere to make them a little bit longer. So I just can use up the yarn. It has a good purpose, and as you can see, it was really not that much yarn. So I just added the Cardiff cashmere to the cuffs of my penny gloves. And as you can see, the colors don't really match up. I mean, they're both white. I think this Cardiff cashmere color is called aeris, if I'm not mistaken. And then the color of the penny gloves that I already had here is Purity, I believe. So they're both whites, but clearly they have very different tones. This is almost like grayish. And when I was done with adding this part on, I felt like it didn't look that great. I kind of like that this is more like fluffy and this is more clean looking. And then I found these little pearls here in my stash, and I thought it might be nice to add them to the transition here, just so, you know, it's a more clean cut line. It doesn't look like it's supposed to be seamless, or like these colors and yarn types are supposed to necessarily go together super well. It makes it very clear that there's a transition here, but it makes the transition look nice, if that makes sense. I would say this is maybe a little bit more elegant than my usual style, but I still really like the way that these gloves turned out, and I find them a bit more comfortable now that they are longer too. So this is what they ended up looking like, and I think that was a pretty cool addition. I'm really happy with this. I like the finished object more now. I really like the idea with the pearls, even though it took me a long time to sew them on here. I feel like I did this the most inefficient way possible, but I couldn't come up with any smarter way to do it. So I just took like one strand of the yarn, and then I would go through one of the stitches and then pull my tapestry needle out and then add the pearl and then put the tapestry needle back in and go through the next stitch. So it was a lot of back and forth, and I don't know if there's a smarter way to do it. Probably there is, but I don't know. That's just how I did it. It took quite a while, but I'm happy with it. And I'm also happy I got to use up all of my yarn leftovers from the winter, because these 2 yarns have been laying around in my little basket on my desk here for a few months. And I was just hoping to come up with something to get rid of them. So that worked out pretty well. I'm really happy with those. And then last week it actually got really warm here, so it was very sunny and like 17 degrees, and I really wanted to be outside. I also wanted to knit, and I had this huge ball of yarn laying around. I think the brand was Katia and the yarn was called 𝗙𝗡𝗡𝗃. I don't know. It showed up in my stash and I didn't really know what to do with it, because this is what it looks like. It's a lot, clearly, and it came with a pattern to make a round scarf, which is not something I really wear. I think the last time I wore a scarf like that was like 2013, whenever these scarves were trendy. Maybe they'll make a comeback sometime soon. Everybody's talking about 2016. What about 2012? Well, anyways, I didn't want to make the round scarf because I didn't really enjoy the way that looked, but I thought it might be fun to have like a statement scarf like that in also a very bright color that isn't usually what I would go for. That's just, you know, a very fluffy long scarf that I can maybe wear with my leather jacket. Just that made the most sense to me to make a scarf. I also had some people suggesting to make a bag, which was a great suggestion. I really like that too, and I did spent quite a lot of time thinking about how to execute that best, but in the end I came to the conclusion that I just didn't know if I would have enough yarn to make a reasonably sized bag, and also I have a few like smaller bags that I can just take if I want to really just take a wallet and my phone and I don't know, a lip gloss or whatever you would put in a tiny bag. So I didn't really need another one, and I thought a scarf I will probably use more often. So I just knitted a very long stockinette scarf back and forth, like flat scarf, a very boring project. I did do it in the forest, however, which was the fun part of this. So I just took my very large ball of yarn and some snacks, and I put on my hiking pants and I went to the forest, and I sat there on some of the benches that I found or on the floor, and it was really nice. I like listened to the birds and knitted for a little bit, and I mean this was fairly quick. I think I spent about an hour and a half total knitting time on this, which I mean it's still kind of a lot considering that I knitted this on 8mm needles, but the yarn is not the easiest to deal with, as you might imagine. It like doesn't glide through your fingers as well as a yarn like this maybe would. So it just took a little bit longer to knit up, but actually it was pretty fun to work with because, you know, you can like see your project grow as you work very well, because knitting just one row makes a pretty significant difference. So I just walked a few kilometers, sat down, knitted for like 15-20 minutes, and then I walked a little bit further and found a new spot to sit. So I actually had a really good day with this. I got to sit outside in the sun for a little bit, and I came out of the forest with a whole new scarf that has now also been washed because it was laying on the forest floor. So that was my main project of last week, and I recommend. It was really fun to knit in the forest. I have a few whips. So I have my ribling sweater, which I actually made quite a bit of progress on that I'm going to get into. I have a small whip pair of socks that just keeps going wrong for some reason. I am still somehow working on my Esther jacket. I'm going to touch on that in the end, and then I'm working on my sweater that I'm designing myself, which I actually haven't really thought about in the last 3 weeks, so I'm just not gonna cover that here. I'm gonna talk about it again once I actually make any progress on it, which hopefully will be soon once I can finish at least one of the other whips. So let's start with the ribling sweater. This is a design I am test knitting for Laura Penrose at the moment. This is what mine looks like at the current moment. There's a lot of loose ends hanging from it because it is currently not on, or halfway on the needles. Oh, I started picking my stitches back up and then I just got too lazy halfway through. So it's half on the needles and half on a piece of yarn. Great. Anyways, this is a broken rib raglan, I guess, sweater that in the original has stripes, and I think most people in my test knitting group are also knitting it with stripes. However, I thought it might be nice to knit a tighter fitting sweater to put under cardigans and blazers and stuff like that. And obviously you can also wear it by itself, but I thought it might be nice to have like a neutral sweater that fits a bit tighter. So I decided to go for a version without stripes, and I'm using Drops Daisy for this in the color dark brown, I think it's called. And I'm almost done, I would say. So you start up here under the collar, and you actually start knitting flat, and you knit this back part here, essentially like short rows. And then you connect in the round, and you work like various increases up here for the yoke section. So sometimes you only increase into the sleeves, sometimes you only increase into the body, sometimes you increase into both the body and the sleeves, and that makes this very beautifully shaped raglan line here that follows the curve of your body really well. And then usually according to the pattern you knit the body first, but I always prefer to connect in the round and then knit the sleeves and the collar and all of the finishings first, just because I find the project a bit easier to handle if I don't have the whole body attached to it. And then also, you know, the body is just mindless knitting for most projects, so that's quite nice. So I attached the collar already, which is actually one of my favorite parts. I was a bit critical, I want to say, when I saw the way it was designed, because since this is already a ribbed sweater, my first idea would have been to just keep up the way that the ribbing looks here for the finishings as well, so for the collar and the cuffs here and also the hem on the body. But even though this is a 2x2 broken rib sweater, you knit 1x1 rib finishings, so I thought that was a bit odd at first, but I actually really like the way that it looks. And also this is a folded over collar, which isn't usually my favorite because I feel like it looks a bit bulky up here, but I actually really like it on this sweater, so I'm glad that I went with the way that it was suggested in the pattern, which I kind of had to because it is a test knit. I mean, I didn't ask if I could change it, so maybe I could have, but I'm glad I didn't. Anyways, I knitted the sleeves next, and these sleeves were so long. I flew through the first part of this project within like maybe a week and a half for like the entire yoke and connecting in the round and knitting the collar and casting on the first sleeve and all that. And then the sleeves kind of took forever for me, at least in comparison to the first part. They were just, I don't know why they felt so long, to be honest, because it's a raglan, as I said, so this part of the sleeve was already done, so I really just had to pick up the stitches here and continue for this part. But I think my issue with it was that the sleeve is kind of tight. I choose to knit the tighter fitting sleeve, so there are two options in the pattern for a wider sleeve and a tighter fitting sleeve, or tapered sleeve I think it's called, and I chose the tapered version. And I don't know how it works for the wider fitting sleeve, but at least this sleeve is small enough that I can't put it on a 40cm cable, so as you might be able to see, that wouldn't really work out. But also, at least up here, it's enough stitches that I didn't want to put it on a small circular either. And I don't really own double pointed needles, like I don't have a selection of them where I could really use them for smaller projects like that. So I was knitting the sleeves on magic loop, which is also not my favorite thing to do, and I was also working on another project in magic loop, so I think that's just why it felt like it was taking forever, because I was just shifting around my stitches all the time. And then also obviously for the sleeve, you're working decreases, so you also have to like count what row you're on or keep measuring, and it takes some energy to always check that you're working in pattern still. I feel like this broken rib pattern, it's actually pretty fun to knit. I like it. It's somewhat engaging because every other row will be ribbing and then the rows in between will just be knitted, so it still feels pretty fast compared to just ribbing. But it does mean that you need to, like, obviously whenever you pick the project back up, but also just in the middle of knitting, always pay attention that you're doing the correct thing. It would happen to me quite a bit that I would knit a ribbed row and then realize like halfway through that this was supposed to be just a knitted row. So I had to frog back a few times because of that, and also I had a few spots already in the sweater where I noticed that like 20 rows up I made a mistake for like 3 stitches. I had to ladder all the way back up. So to always have this small amount of focus that you need to make sure you're staying in pattern has been a bit difficult for me. I feel like I struggled less than other people with the increase parts up here, because a few people in my testnet group were talking about that they definitely have some kind of a mistake here where they forgot an increase because the increase pattern changes all the time, which I actually didn't really mind that much. I didn't find that very difficult because I think this is like, you need to like properly focus on that, so I know I'm supposed to be focusing, and that worked out quite well for me. But for these types of pattern things where you kind of have to keep a little bit of attention up but also not really, that was a bit harder for me. But anyways, we got it done. And then this is the cuff I worked. It's also 1x1 rib, and I did an Italian bind off on it too, so it's pretty stretchy. And then obviously I have a second sleeve, so the main and complicated parts of this sweater are very much done. I think last time I showed this I was like halfway through the second sleeve, so now I have both. This is what it looks like. And well, I picked up the body, clearly. I worked quite a few centimeters on it, and I obviously just tried it on, which is why it was on scrap yarn to begin with. And I decided I want to keep going for about like 4 more centimeters for the body, and then knit the hem, which I believe is also like 4 centimeters. So I would say I can probably finish this within the week. The only thing that worries me a bit about this is the amount of ease that I have, because it feels like, at the current moment at least, like the amount of ease is a bit different depending on the part of the sweater that I'm looking at. So the size that I chose, which is size 3, is supposed to give me 0 centimeters of ease around the bust. And I would say that at the bust right now it is a little bit looser than that. So I have a few extra centimeters there, and probably when I block it that will be more, because this yarn stretches quite a bit with blocking, and this texture also. So that's probably, it probably has a bit more ease than intended around the bust, which, I mean, it's fine, you know, better a little bit too much there than a little bit too little. And that is also true for these raglan seams right here. Like, I do have a good amount of fabric under the arms, maybe like this much, which is not a bad thing, you know. It's like kind of nice to not have your knits sit like very tight under your arm. But then for the sleeves, which, as I said, I knitted the tapered sleeves, so it is supposed to be tighter, but I feel like the sleeves are very tight in comparison to the rest of the sweater, on me at least right now. That might change with blocking. I did a mid-project block on this, so parts of it have been blocked, parts of it haven't, but I would say that right now the sleeve is almost uncomfortably tight. It's like tight to the point where I notice when I'm wearing it, and I think when I block it, it will definitely be comfortably tight, but probably still tight, and I'm a bit worried that it might look weird compared to the amount of ease that I have under my arm and at the bust. So I'm not quite sure about all of that yet. I mean, worst case scenario, I could go back in and knit the wider sleeve if it like really bothered me. I'm pretty sure this is more of a me issue than a pattern issue. I obviously knitted the sleeve in magic loop, and then I knitted the body and everything else in the rounds, so there might be just a slight gauge difference there. And then also there was a bit of a inconsistency in the pattern for the sleeves. So under the arms you used to end up with an incomplete pattern repeat. And when I asked Laura about it, she said that she wants to fix that. So the pattern has since been changed, but I was still working with the incorrect version of it. And at the time, Laura just said, you can fix it however you want, essentially. And I decided to just keep going with the decreases until I was ready to do the cuff, when originally the decreases would have probably ended, like around here maybe. So my sleeve, at least at this point, is a bit tighter than it is intended to be. I feel like it is already pretty tight around my elbow, but as I said, that might just be a gauge thing. I actually haven't measured to see if my gauge is still correct, but I think it should be. It looks pretty consistent, at least for the body. So my plan with this is just to keep going with the body for like 4 more centimeters and then knit the hem, and then this is ready to be bound off and blocked, and I can fill out my little feedback form. But I do have until the end of the month to do that, so we should be fine there. This has kind of been a weird progression for me, because I was really obsessed with this for the first like week and a half, and knitted like half the project, and then I was so slow with the second sleeve. And now I feel like I made a good chunk of progress again, so I hope I can get this done probably until the end of the week. That would be quite nice, and then I can start focusing on some of my other bigger whips. I do have one small whip that I want to get into before though, and that is my Sunday socks. And as you might be able to hear, I am struggling with them once more. If you don't know the lore behind this, I once started knitting, and then I started knitting a pair of socks because that's what you knit, right? And then I didn't finish that pair of socks for a really long time because I really wasn't having fun. I just thought, okay, knitting socks, not for me, never mind. And then at some point I forced myself to finish that pair of socks, and it turned out pretty bad, which was just due to me, you know, being a beginner knitter when I started it. I have learned since, and then I made 2 pairs of socks as a Christmas gift knit, so 4 individual socks in total. And the pattern that I used for that was the Sunday socks by Petite Knit. And I was already struggling with it then because I kept trying to make adjustments to it. I think because in my head a sock is like an easy project, you know, it's more like an accessory type of pattern. So in my mind it should be easy to make adjustments to it. But I keep forgetting that I'm not a very experienced sock knitter, so I just make like random adjustments to it without really understanding how they'll affect the finished object. So I kept like making it worse than it had to be for some reason, and in the end just knitted 2 pairs of socks exactly to pattern, and it was completely fine. So then I got gifted some more sock yarn, and I really didn't know what else to do with it except knit socks. And I had just practiced the Sunday sock pattern twice, so I thought, that I'm pretty good at that now. Maybe I can make some adjustments to it, mainly because I wanted to use up all of the yarn for it, but obviously with socks that are knitted like top down, it's a bit hard to estimate how long you can make the cuff before you should start on the rest of the sock. So my idea was to just do a provisional cast on, which I didn't do enough research on, once more, and I didn't realize that it doesn't really work in ribbing, which this is a ribbed sock. So I did the provisional cast on and I knitted two socks like all the way to the toe. And then when I tried to pick the stitches back up, I noticed that it's really not working. And then I tried to do the proper thing and just unravel and start over. So I thought, okay, I'm not doing the provisional cast on, it's clearly not working. I'm just going to estimate how much yarn I need. I will, however, make some adjustments to the cuff, because the cuff on this sock is just knitted straight down, and as you can tell, the cuff is pretty long. And I don't know what your leg looks like, but my leg is bigger up here than it is down here. And I thought that would probably not be very comfortable to knit the sock like that. So I did a bunch of math trying to figure out how much yarn I would need for this part of the sock and this part of the sock and whatever, and I came up with what I thought was a smart way to adjust the cuff so that it was wider up here and smaller down here. And then I was just planning to knit the rest of the sock to pattern. I started on that. I did weird things with the decreases that I didn't really like, so I started over and knit 3 times, and eventually I got like halfway through the cuff before realizing I must have miscalculated or mismeasured something, because it's not looking like the amount of yarn I have will actually get me a full sock in the end if I keep continuing like that. So then I thought, okay, this sock has been annoying me for so long. I've been trying to make adjustments to this pattern so many times and it's clearly not working. And what did I do for Christmas? I just knitted the sock down to pattern and it was fine. So maybe that's exactly what I should do. So I started over on it and I followed the pattern. And once in one of the previous versions that I just went through, I had the whole like foot part of the sock knitted up, right? So I thought, I have this piece of yarn, like this entire continuous piece of yarn that I needed from the start of the cuff here down to the toe of the sock. So I know that this is how much yarn I need for the foot of the sock, and I can use the rest of the yarn to make the cuff. So I used what I thought was the rest of the yarn for the cuff, and then I started on the foot again, and then halfway through the foot I realized I think I might have mixed up those 2 pieces of yarn because I had so much yarn left over. And then again, I tried to do the right thing, and I unraveled all the way back to the cuff, and I was like, no, I'm going to make the cuff longer. According to my calculations, I should be able to make the cuff as long as it says in the pattern, which is 25 centimeters. So I did that, being a little conservative. I only did 23 centimeters. And then I started on the foot again, which is the version that you're seeing now. And I'm now realizing that with the amount of yarn that I have left over, which is on the floor right now, which is this much, I'm not going to be able to finish this sock. So once more, I will have to rip back, make the cuff a little bit shorter this time, not a little bit longer as last time. And then maybe I can finally finish the first one of those socks. And I don't know what to say about this project anymore. It's just ridiculous at that point. Like, I get it in retrospect. All of the decisions I just went through that I made, they do sound a bit stupid, but in the moment I genuinely think I'm doing a smart thing. I don't know why I keep doing that to myself. So I will rip back. I will leave a very conservative amount of yarn so I can finish the foot of this. And then I will finish the foot of this, and I will do it a second time. And then I will just get rid of the rest of the yarn, because I don't know what else to do with it. It is way too colorful for me to do anything else with it. It will probably not be an amount that I can really do anything else with. And I'm just not gonna worry so much about using up this amount of yarn that I have perfectly, because I think at this point there's nothing else I can do. Also, I want to add that I was right. It is uncomfortable to wear it like this. This is the longest cuff I ever knitted on this sock. It is not comfortable at the top of my leg. This is too tight. My leg is bigger than this. So I was right. I was right wanting to make this bigger at the top. It just didn't work out. So now I'm just going to make the whole cuff shorter, which should solve that problem. It should solve the problem of running out of yarn here. And then hopefully I never have to think about that again. I don't know. I keep going back and forth with the pairs of socks. I do one pair of socks. I'm like, I hate this. And I kind of get myself in a situation where I have to do another one. I'm like, oh, that wasn't too bad. I kind of like doing socks. Maybe I will knit more socks now. Then I cast on another pair of socks. And then this happens. So yeah, we'll see. I don't know. Maybe I just picked the wrong pattern. I don't know. I do like about this pattern that it is, I don't know what weight is this even, DK? No idea. It's like a higher weight sock, so I don't have to knit it on like 2.5mm needles, and I wouldn't start over on that. I think I would just cry and give up. But I will finish these socks. I am determined. I don't know when. Maybe it will be after I die, but at some point, probably I will finish them. And then finally, I have a little bit of an update on another petite knit pattern that I've been working on. This is 𝗙𝗡 jacket, or the part of 𝗙𝗡 jacket that I got done. For this pattern, I think I saw this the first time I ever opened Ravelry. So I was really new to knitting. I saw this pattern. I immediately fell in love with it. I still love it. I think it's a great design. And then it was a few months before I got yarn for it. And then I had the yarn. It was winter, but I never got to cast it on that winter. Then it got warmer. I didn't cast it on as well. So it was like a year after I got the yarn last year in the winter that I cast this on finally. And this project just kind of kept dragging on, and there were a few problems with it. And then at some point a few weeks ago, I ran into so many problems that I just wasn't having fun with it anymore. And I just didn't know how to best fix it. And I decided to consciously put this away for a bit, have this be not an abandoned whip, like not something I forget about, but just something I take a bit of a break from. And I think I've come to some kind of a conclusion with it. So my issues with this, mainly the issue is the gauge for me, because in the pattern, what is recommended as a yarn, I believe it's 2 different yarns, and you hold 1 strand of one of them and 2 strands of the other one. So you have 3 strands of wool that you're holding together for this jacket, which I never quite got the point of that. I don't know if the reason for that was just that the designer had that yarn laying around, but I didn't quite understand why that would be necessary to hold 3 strands of the same fiber together. So I decided to swap out the yarn for filcolana peruvian, which I did a bunch of math and I decided that would be the best choice. I don't really know what math I was doing. I think I didn't make a bad choice with it, but I don't know. At the time I just picked this. And then it was laying around for a few months before the summer of last year. I knitted a few swatches for this because I was intending on starting this project at some point. So I knitted swatches on many different needle sizes, I remember. And in the end, I settled on using a 3.5mm needle, which is a very small needle size for this pattern and this yarn. I think this yarn recommends a 4 to 5mm needle, and this pattern recommends a 5mm needle. So I don't know what was going on there. I have always been a more loose knitter. I still am, although I feel like it was worse at that period where I was watching for it, where I was sizing down my needle quite significantly for almost all patterns that I was making. And I was also just not that sure that I made the right choice with swapping out the yarn for this one, just because I didn't have a lot of experience in swapping out yarns. So I just went down to the 3.5mm needle and thought, well, I'm using a smaller needle size for almost every project I'm working on, and I'm not even sure if the yarn that I use to swap out is correct, so maybe I'm just like way off with the gauge here, and that makes sense. That was what gave me gauge at the time. And then in the winter last year I decided to finally start on this, and I was too lazy to make another swatch, which I guess was the main mistake here. So I just started knitting on this on my 3.5mm needle because that was what gave me gauge like 6 months before that, right? And I did a mid-project block at some point because I wasn't, you know, I kind of knew I was doing something sketchy. So I just really knitted this like back part here. And then I did a mid-project block and I realized that my jacket would turn out quite small, which was not what I was wanting. I wanted something pretty oversized. And in the pattern, there are essentially 2 charts, one for the smaller sizes and one for the bigger sizes. And I was working a size large at the time anyway, so I was working the chart for the bigger sizes either way. And I decided to just size up a little bit. So I switched to working the 2XL at that point with the 3.5mm needle in hopes that that would get me a finished object that would actually fit me. And that's how I continued, and it did actually give me a finished object that would fit me, I would say. This was pretty much the size that I was going for. And that was fine for the most part. I was just slowly chipping away at the body because, you know, you knit this flat and it is quite a lot of texture. So, I don't know, I felt like I always had trouble getting back into the pattern. So I would have to sit down and like really focus. And for the first like half an hour, I would make quite many mistakes and have to go back and all that before I got back into how the pattern works. And then if I kept working on it consistently, that was fine, but I also kept taking like week-long or longer breaks from this, so I was kind of in and out of it. But I did manage to finish the body part, and then I added this hem here, and that was the second thing I was kind of unhappy with, because I really don't like when the hem of a garment cinches in. I find that it doesn't really look flattering on me with my body shape, so I was kind of already prepared to block this, not like the hem, and rip the hem back out and redo it. So that was already the first thing that I wasn't quite happy with. And then I started working on the sleeves, and that's where everything went downhill. So I believe this is the sleeve I started on, and I just worked this on the 3.5mm needle I was working with. I don't know how well you can see this on the camera, but at least in this part here, it is pretty clear that this looks a lot tighter and a lot neater than what I was doing on the body. And I thought that the reason for that was that I was working flat for the body and in the round for the sleeves, and I just knit more neatly in the round, as do most people. I mean, you're not only doing knit stitches, it's still texture, but I just feel like I knit more neatly when I'm knitting from the right side only. And then also, because this was the sleeve and I had this on a 40cm cable, I feel like I was just pulling my stitches a bit tighter because they have to like stretch around the cable, while for the flat part they don't have to do that. So I think I was just knitting this way more tightly than I was knitting the body. And then I thought, well, maybe I can fix it by just switching to a 4mm needle, just sizing up for the sleeve, because it's kind of a common problem, you know, a lot of people have a bit of a different gauge in the round than they have flat. So I switched to a 4mm needle and I picked up the second sleeve, and it is a little bit better, but I feel like it's still very obvious that this looks neater than the body. And it doesn't really bother me that the body looks a bit more rustic or uneven. I think that fits with the pattern, but it just bothers me that it's noticeably different. And at that point I was quite frustrated with the whole project because I had already knitted quite a bit of the sleeve, and it actually took a long time because I was knitting it so much tighter. So I did a bunch more rows on this than I did for the same amount of length on the body. And then I switched the needle size, I knitted quite a significant amount of sleeve again. It doesn't look like a lot, but this was actually a lot of work. And it still wasn't the way I wanted it, and I was unhappy with the hem. And then I started, you know, picking like little things apart, like that my cast on here is maybe a bit tight, stuff like that. And I didn't know how to fix it, because nothing I could have done about the sleeve except maybe trying to knit it flat would have really solved my problem. And I had so many major other whips going on at the time, and I was like upset about some part of all of them, so I decided to just put this away for a bit and sit on it and not worry about it. And then finally this week I had a revelation of maybe the reason why my knitting looks like more uneven in the body is because 3.5mm is just not the right needle size to be working on here. Like, it's not the needle size that's recommended in the pattern, it's not the needle size that's recommended for the yarn, and clearly it wasn't giving me gauge anymore, which is why I had to switch sizes in the middle of this in the first place. So maybe I should just try swatching for it again and see how that looks. So I swatched for it again. I did 3 swatches on, I mean, this was already on 3.5, so I knew that. And then I swatched on 4, 4.5 and 5mm needles. And to nobody's surprise, this is the swatch I did on 5mm, and it gave me gauge. So I think I should have just swatched before I started again. Now I'm actually considering starting over on this, which it's a bit ridiculous because it's almost done, you know, it's really just missing a little bit of sleeve and the buttons. But I mean, I'm just not very happy with it. There's so many parts of this now that kind of annoy me, and I know I could do a better job if I started over on bigger needles. Also, I feel like it would be faster because this project took so long. I mean, it's a lot of knitting. Clearly it's a cardigan, it's an oversized cardigan, it's knitted flat, which is always slower, and it has a bunch of texture. At some point I believe I was able to knit a few rows on this without having the chart next to me, but you kind of always have to have the chart next to you, and you know, it takes a while, which is what is kind of discouraging me from starting over. Also, after the whole sock fiasco, I feel like starting over might not always be my best option. But I think that's probably what I'm gonna do if I'm honest, because I don't know. I don't think I can finish this in a way where I'm actually happy with the outcome. I will just be happy that I'm done, and I would wear it, you know, but I would always like find little parts of it that I'm not that happy with. So I think the grown-up thing would probably be to just knit it again on 5mm. So that already leads me into my acquisitions and plans. I again don't have any acquisitions. I don't know why I keep calling this section acquisitions and plans, just because everybody else is doing it. I never buy anything. Like, very rarely I will have new yarn or new gadgets to show off. Anyways, my plan, clearly finish the ribling sweater. That's my test knit, that has a deadline, and I'm almost done. I'm quite excited to get a major project finished because I haven't done that yet this year, so that would be great. And then once I'm done with that, maybe I'm gonna actually cast on the Esther jacket again on 5mm needles this time instead of on 3.5. And well, I don't know, that's like a major fail somehow, but also it's like whatever. It's a fun pattern to knit, at least. I would say I was enjoying this. I'm just hoping that if I start over, I will actually be able to get the same gauge and the same neatness for the body and the sleeves, even though the sleeves are knitted and the round and the body is not. So yeah, I think that's just gonna be my plan. I don't really want to make any more plans. I've had it with plans. I always keep making these plans and then I don't do them because I don't have time and everything goes wrong and then I'm upset, and I'm not gonna make any further plans than that. I'm just, hopefully next time we talk, have this cast on at a reasonable needle size, and then hopefully I will be able to knit this at a reasonable speed with a reasonable gauge. That is all the plans I'm making. So I hope you enjoyed me rambling on about mistakes that were made. I hope you didn't make any. I hope all of your projects are going well. Please tell me about them. I would love to know what you're working on, or tell me about your most major fuck up that you had recently in your knitting. That would probably make me feel better.